The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Pecos, Texas, as Silas Hayes rode his bay stallion down the dusty main street. It was 1876, and like many towns on the frontier, Pecos had grown from nothing into something resembling civilization in just a few short years. The railroad had brought commerce, opportunity, and people looking to escape their past's people like Silas himself. At 28, Silas had already lived several lifetimes' worth of experiences. After fighting in the war and spending years drifting from one cattle outfit to another, he'd finally found steady work with the Cross T Ranch just outside of town. His weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a man who'd known hardship, but the quiet intensity in his blue eyes suggested there was more to him than just another cowboy passing through. As he dismounted in front of the general store, he noticed a new sign hanging in the window of what used to be Old Man Peterson's abandoned tailor shop, Hudson Millinery and Dress Shop. Silas paused, adjusting his hat as he squinted at the fresh paint. Pecos wasn't exactly the kind of town where fancy dress shops thrived, and his curiosity was piqued. That same afternoon, Sophia Harrington was arranging the last of her fabric bolts on the newly constructed shelves of her shop. At 23, she had taken an enormous risk moving from Philadelphia to this frontier town. Her fingers, once soft and unmarked from her comfortable Eastern upbringing, now showed small calluses from the constant work of establishing her business. The bell above the door jingled, and Sophia turned to find a tall figure silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. She raised her hand to shield her eyes. "Afternoon, madam," came a deep voice as the man stepped fully into the shop, removing his hat. "Just noticed your sign." Pecos hasn't had a proper dress shop before. Sophia straightened her spine, lifting her chin with the dignified poise her mother had drilled into her since childhood. "Then I suppose it's about time, Mr. Hayes, Silas Hayes." He ran a hand through his dark hair, which was matted from his hat. "I work over at the Cross T. Sophia Harrington," she replied, extending her hand formally as she would back east. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hayes." Silas looked at her outstretched hand for a moment before taking it gently in his much larger one. His touch was brief but warm, and Sophia couldn't help noticing the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her own pale complexion. "What brings a lady like yourself all the way to Pecos?" he asked, genuinely curious. "This ain't exactly Philadelphia or Boston." Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly. "You have a good ear, Mr. Hayes. I am indeed from Philadelphia." She busied herself adjusting a bolt of blue calico. "As for why I'm here, I suppose I wanted to build something of my own, somewhere new. The West offers opportunities that aren't available to women back east." Silas nodded slowly. "That it does, though it offers plenty of hardships to go with those opportunities." His eyes scanned the shop, taking in the neatly organized fabrics, the mannequin wearing a half-finished dress and the small sewing area in the corner. "You set all this up yourself?" "I did," she said with a hint of pride, "though I had some help with the heavier shelving. Mr. Rodriguez from the carpentry shop was kind enough to assist." "Well, it's impressive, Miss Harrington." His smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines around his mouth. "I suspect the ladies of Pecos will be mighty pleased to have you here." "Thank you," Sophia replied, surprised by his genuine admiration. "Though I'll be offering men's shirts and tailoring services as well. Perhaps you might need something yourself someday, Mr. Hayes." Silas chuckled, glancing down at his worn flannel shirt and dusty jeans. "I reckon I'm not much for fancy clothes, but I might just take you up on that someday." He placed his hat back on his head. "I should let you get back to your work. Just wanted to welcome you to town." As he turned to leave, Sophia called after him, "Mr. Hayes." He paused at the door, looking back. "Do you know where I might find reliable transportation to collect supplies? I'll need to travel to El Paso occasionally." "The stagecoach runs twice a week," he said, "but it can be unpredictable. If you're in a bind, the Cross T sometimes sends men that way for cattle business." He hesitated before adding, "I could let you know when someone's making the trip." Sophia smiled. "That would be most kind, thank you." After he left, Sophia found herself standing at the window, watching his tall figure mount his horse and ride away. There was something about the cowboy that intrigued her, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Sophia established herself in Pecos. To her surprise, business was steady from the start. The wives of the more prosperous ranchers and merchants were delighted to have access to new fabrics and fashions, while the working women appreciated having their worn garments mended by skilled hands. Silas found reasons to visit the shop more often than a man with no interest in clothing should. Sometimes he brought news of an upcoming supply run to El Paso. Other times, he simply stopped by to ask how she was settling in. Each visit lingered a little longer than the last, their conversations growing more comfortable as spring turned to summer. One sweltering July afternoon, Silas arrived at the shop looking more put together than usual. He'd trimmed his beard and was wearing a relatively clean shirt. "Miss Harrington," he said, removing his hat as always when he entered. "I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the hotel restaurant this evening. They've got a new cook from New Orleans who's supposed to be pretty good." Sophia looked up from her sewing, her heart beating a little faster at the unexpected invitation. "That sounds lovely, Mr. Hayes. What time shall I expect you? I'll come by at 6 if that suits you." "6 would be perfect, thank you." After he left, Sophia found herself opening her personal trunk, pulling out a dress she hadn't worn since arriving in Pecos, a lovely pale green creation with delicate embroidery that complemented her auburn hair. As she prepared for the evening, she couldn't help wondering when exactly Silas Hayes had become more than just a friendly face in this new town. Dinner at the Pecos Hotel was surprisingly pleasant. The new cook had indeed brought a touch of New Orleans flavor to the frontier, and Silas proved to be thoughtful company. He spoke of growing up in Missouri, his time fighting for the Union during the war, and his journey west afterward. Sophia shared stories of her own, of losing her parents to influenza when she was 19, of working as an apprentice to a dressmaker in Philadelphia, and of her decision to strike out on her own after inheriting a modest sum from an aunt. "It can't have been easy," Silas said as they walked back toward her shop after dinner, "coming all this way alone." "No," she admitted, "but it was necessary. Philadelphia held too many memories and too few opportunities for a woman who wanted to be more than just someone's wife." The summer sky was still light even though it was past 8, and the air had cooled just enough to be comfortable. When they reached her shop, Sophia hesitated at the door. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she asked, surprising herself with the invitation. Silas looked equally surprised but nodded. "I'd like that very much." Her living quarters behind the shop were small but neat, a single room with a bed in one corner, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a dresser. She busied herself with preparing coffee while Silas stood awkwardly by the table, his hat in his hands. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to one of the chairs. As she placed the coffee pot on the stove, she added, "This is the first time I've entertained anyone here." "I'm honored," he said, his voice soft. When she turned to look at him, she found his eyes on her with an expression that made her breath catch. They talked late into the evening, the coffee long finished. When Silas finally stood to leave, there was a moment, just a brief one, where they stood close enough that Sophia could feel the warmth radiating from him. His eyes dropped to her lips, but then he stepped back, placing his hat on his head. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, Miss Harrington." "Sophia," she said, "please call me Sophia." His smile was warm. "Sophia, and I'm Silas. Good night, Silas. Good night, Sophia." After that evening, something shifted between them. Silas began stopping by the shop almost daily, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes staying to help her move heavy bolts of fabric or fix a loose floorboard. They took to having supper together several times a week, either at the hotel or, increasingly often, in her small quarters where Sophia would cook simple meals. By September, most of Pecos had taken note of the budding romance between the dressmaker and the cowboy. Sophia found herself the recipient of knowing smiles from the women who frequented her shop, while Silas endured good-natured ribbing from his fellow ranch hands. It was on a crisp autumn evening when Silas first kissed her. They had been walking back from watching a traveling show that had set up on the edge of town, a collection of performers doing tricks and telling stories. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. "I've been wanting to do that for months," he confessed afterward, his forehead resting against hers. "What took you so long?" she teased, her hands resting lightly on his chest. After that, their courtship progressed with the steady certainty of two people who had found in each other exactly what they'd been searching for. By Christmas, Silas had moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse at the Cross T into Sophia's quarters behind the shop. The town gossiped, of course, but frontier communities tended to be more forgiving of such arrangements than eastern cities. Still, Silas spoke of marriage, and Sophia found herself eagerly planning for a spring wedding. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Silas continued working at the ranch while Sophia's business thrived. They talked of saving enough money to build a proper house on the edge of town where they might start a family someday. The future stretched before them, full of promise. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived on a bitter January day, delivered by the twice-weekly mail coach from El Paso. Sophia was alone in the shop when the postman handed it to her, an elegant cream envelope addressed in flowing script to Miss Sophia Harrington, Millinery and Dress Shop, Pecos, Texas. The return address made her blood run cold. Harrison Blake, attorney at law, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal and unfolded the heavy paper inside. "Dear Miss Harrington," it began. "It is with deepest regret that I must inform you of the passing of Mr. Edward Montgomery." Sophia sank onto her sewing stool, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Edward Montgomery, a name she had tried so hard to forget. A name that belonged to her past in Philadelphia, a past she had fled nearly a year ago. The letter continued with formal condolences before getting to the true purpose. Prior to his untimely death, Mr. Montgomery made provisions in his will that certain items of a personal nature be returned to you. These effects have been entrusted to me for delivery. I shall be arriving in Pecos by the end of January to fulfill this obligation and to discuss certain other matters pertaining to Mr. Montgomery's estate that may be of interest to you. Sophia read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding in her ears. Edward was dead. The man who had once promised her the world, who had betrayed her so completely that she had fled across the country to escape the humiliation, was dead. And now his lawyer was coming to Pecos, bringing with him pieces of a past she had tried desperately to leave behind. When Silas returned from the ranch that evening, he found Sophia sitting in the darkened shop, the letter still clutched in her hand. "Sophia," he called, concern evident in his voice as he lit a lamp. "Are you all right? Why are you sitting in the dark?" She looked up at him, her face pale in the lamplight. "I received a letter today," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "From Philadelphia." Silas set the lamp down and knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. "What's happened? Is it bad news? Someone I once knew has died," she swallowed hard. "His lawyer is coming to Pecos at the end of the month." "Who was he?" Silas asked gently. "This man who died." Sophia closed her eyes, the pain of old wounds making it difficult to speak. "His name was Edward Montgomery. He was once my fiancé." Silas's hands tightened slightly around hers, but his face remained calm. "You never mentioned being engaged before." "I never wanted to think about it again," she admitted. "It ended badly, very badly. It's why I left Philadelphia." Over the next hour, as they moved to their small living quarters and sat at the table with cups of strong coffee between them, Sophia told Silas the story she had kept buried since arriving in Pecos. Edward Montgomery had been the son of one of Philadelphia's wealthiest merchants. Handsome, charming, and well-connected, he had swept young Sophia off her feet after meeting her at a society function where she was helping her dressmaker employer with the ladies' gowns. Despite the difference in their stations, he the heir to a fortune, she a working-class orphan. Edward had pursued her relentlessly. "I thought it was like a fairy tale," Sophia said bitterly, "the handsome prince choosing the common girl. My employer warned me that men of his class often amused themselves with women they had no intention of marrying, but I was too blinded by his attention to listen." Edward had proposed after 6 months of courtship, presenting her with a stunning diamond ring and promises of a life of luxury and devotion. For 3 months, Sophia had lived in a dream, planning her wedding and imagining her future as Mrs. Edward Montgomery. "Then I found out about Lillian Pierce," she continued, her voice hard with remembered pain. "The woman he was actually going to marry, a marriage arranged by their families since childhood. He had been engaged to her the entire time he was courting me." When confronted, Edward had been coldly pragmatic. Yes, he was going to marry Lillian, as had always been the plan, but he cared for Sophia and wanted her to stay in his life as his mistress. He had even purchased a small house where she could live, conveniently close to his offices. "He acted as though he was doing me a favor," Sophia said, disgust evident in her tone. "As if being his secret plaything was something I should be grateful for." When she had refused, throwing his ring back at him and threatening to tell Lillian everything, Edward's charm had vanished. He had threatened to ruin her reputation, to ensure she never found work in Philadelphia again. In a city where social connections meant everything, his threats were not idle. "So I left," Sophia concluded. "I took the money my aunt had left me, which I'd been saving for after the wedding, and I came west, as far from Philadelphia as I could get." Silas, who had listened to the entire story without interruption, finally spoke. "And now his lawyer is coming here. Why?" Sophia shook her head. "The letter says Edward left some personal items to me in his will and that there are other matters to discuss. I can't imagine what he could possibly want me to have. When does this lawyer arrive?" "By the end of the month." Silas reached across the table and took her hand. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Your past is your past, Sophia. It doesn't change who you are or what we have." She squeezed his hand gratefully, but a sense of foreboding had settled over her like a shroud. Somehow, she knew that Edward Montgomery wasn't done disrupting her life, even from beyond the grave. Harrison Blake arrived in Pecos on the last day of January, bringing with him the bitter chill of an eastern winter despite the relatively mild Texas day. He was exactly as Sophia had imagined an attorney for the Montgomery family would be, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that must have cost more than most cowboys earned in a year, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to being respected. He appeared at her shop just before closing time, introducing himself with a formal bow. "Miss Harrington, a pleasure to meet you at last. I trust my letter reached you without incident." "It did, Mr. Blake," Sophia replied, grateful that no customers were present. "Please come through to the back. We can speak privately there." Silas had wanted to be present for this meeting, but Sophia had gently insisted on handling it alone. "This is my past," she had told him. "I need to face it on my terms." Now, as she led the attorney to the small table in her living quarters and offered him coffee, she was glad for the decision. This felt like closing a chapter of her life, and she needed to do it herself. "I won't waste your time with pleasantries, Miss Harrington," Blake said once they were seated. "I understand my presence must be uncomfortable for you, given your history with Mr. Montgomery." "You're well informed about our relationship?" Sophia asked, keeping her voice neutral. Blake nodded. "Edward confided in me not just as his attorney but as a friend. He spoke of you often in his final months." This surprised her. "His final months, was his death expected?" "Consumption," Blake said grimly. "He was diagnosed last spring." By summer, the doctors had given him less than a year. He paused, studying her face. "He was engaged to be married, you know, to Lillian Pierce, but he broke it off when he received his diagnosis." Sophia absorbed this information silently, so Edward had never married Lillian after all. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. "I've brought the items he wanted you to have," Blake continued, placing his leather briefcase on the table and opening it. "But first, there's a letter he asked me to give you personally." He handed her an envelope sealed with wax bearing the Montgomery family crest. Sophia stared at it for a long moment before breaking the seal and unfolding the pages inside. "My dearest Sophia," the letter began in Edward's familiar, flowing script. "If you are reading this, then I have left this world, hopefully with more dignity than I showed in my dealings with you." As she read, Edward's voice seemed to fill the small room, a voice full of regret and belated honesty. He wrote of his cowardice in not defying his family's expectations, of how he had truly loved her but lacked the courage to choose love over duty and fortune. His illness, he wrote, had given him a clarity he had never possessed in health. "I know I have no right to ask your forgiveness," the letter concluded, "but I hope that the enclosed items returned to you now might in some small way acknowledge the wrong I did you. Live well, my Sophia, be happier than I had the courage to be. Forever yours, Edward." Sophia folded the letter with trembling hands, unsure whether to feel anger, pity, or some complex emotion for which she had no name. "Are you all right, Miss Harrington?" Blake asked gently. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The attorney reached into his briefcase again and removed a small wooden box. "This contains the personal items mentioned in his will, and there is one more matter." He produced another document. "Edward also left you a sum of money, a considerable sum, in fact." Sophia stared at him in shock. "Money? I don't want his money." "Nevertheless, it is yours legally, $5,000 to be precise." The amount made her gasp. It was more money than she could earn in a decade with her shop. "Why would he do this?" she asked, genuinely baffled. Blake's expression softened. "I believe he saw it as restitution, not charity. The funds have already been transferred to the Bank of El Paso in your name. You need only present yourself there with identification to access them." After the attorney left, promising to call again in the morning to answer any questions she might have after reviewing the contents of the box, Sophia sat alone at her table. The wooden box sat unopened before her, along with the document detailing her inheritance. When Silas returned from the ranch an hour later, he found her still sitting there, staring at the box. "Sophia," he called softly. "How did it go?" She looked up, her eyes troubled. "Edward left me a letter in this box and," she hesitated, "money, a lot of money." Silas sat across from her, his expression carefully neutral. "Have you opened the box?" "Not yet. I'm afraid of what might be inside." "Would you like me to open it for you?" Sophia shook her head. "No, I need to do this myself." With a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue velvet, lay several items. A diamond ring she recognized immediately as the engagement ring she had thrown back at Edward. A small bundle of letters tied with ribbon that she had written to him during their courtship. A delicate silver locket on a chain, and a folded piece of cream-colored fabric that seemed oddly familiar. With a frown, Sophia lifted the fabric from the box, carefully unfolding it. As it opened in her hands, recognition dawned and the blood drained from her face. "What is it?" Silas asked, concerned by her sudden pallor. "It's a handkerchief," she whispered. "My handkerchief. The one I was embroidering as part of my trousseau." Her fingers traced the partially completed pattern of intertwined roses and the monogram she had been working on. SM. For what would have been her married initials, Sophia Montgomery. "Why would he keep this?" Silas asked. "I don't know." Sophia's voice was barely audible. "It's such a simple thing, unfinished, imperfect." Her fingers closed around the fabric. "Of all the things he could have kept." Suddenly, the reality of Edward's death hit her fully. Despite everything he had done, despite the pain he had caused her, there had been genuine feeling there, corrupted by weakness and selfishness, perhaps, but real nonetheless. And now he was gone, his life cut short before he could make amends or become the man he might have been. Tears filled her eyes, not for the love she had lost, but for the waste of it all, the wasted potential, the wasted years, the wasted chance for Edward to have lived differently. Silas watched her silently, his own emotions carefully masked. When she finally looked up at him, wiping her eyes, he asked the question that had been hanging between them since the letter arrived. "What will you do with the money?" Sophia looked down at the document, then back at Silas. "I don't know. Part of me wants to refuse it, to send it back to his family, but another part, She hesitated. Another part thinks about what we could do with it, the house we've talked about building, the future we've planned. Silas's jaw tightened. I can provide for us, Sophia. I don't need a dead man's money to build a life with you. I know you can, she said quickly, reaching for his hand. That's not what I meant, but this money, it could give us a start that would take years to save for otherwise. Money that comes from the man who hurt you, Silas pointed out, his voice harder than she was accustomed to hearing. Money that feels like he's reaching out from the grave to stay connected to you. Sophia withdrew her hand, stung by his words. That's not fair, Silas. I didn't ask for this. I know you didn't, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, I don't like the idea of building our future on his foundation. It wouldn't be his foundation, she insisted. It would be ours. Whatever Edward's motivations were, this money could help us. Help our future children someday. The mention of children softened Silas's expression. They had spoken often of the family they hoped to have once they were properly settled. I need time to think about this, he finally said. It's been a long day for both of us. Later that night, as they lay in bed with an unusual distance between them, Sophia stared at the ceiling and thought about the strange twist her life had taken. Just when she had finally put Philadelphia and Edward Montgomery firmly in her past, they had come rushing back into her present, threatening the happiness she had built with Silas. The following morning, Harrison Blake returned as promised. Silas had already left for the ranch, his goodbye more reserved than usual. The attorney seemed to sense the tension his visit had created. I hope my presence hasn't caused difficulties for you, Miss Harrington, he said as they again sat at her small table. It's complicated, Sophia admitted. I've built a new life here. The past showing up unexpectedly has been unsettling. Blake nodded understandingly. I can imagine. If it helps, my business here is concluded. I'll be departing on tomorrow's stage back to El Paso and from there to Philadelphia. Before you go, Sophia said, could you tell me more about Edward's final months? His letter mentioned his illness giving him clarity but little else. The attorney's expression grew solemn. Edward changed considerably after his diagnosis. He broke his engagement to Lillian, as I mentioned. He also reconciled with his younger brother with whom he'd been estranged for years. He arranged generous provisions for his household staff. Blake paused. And he spoke often of you, wondering where you were, if you were happy. Finding you became something of an obsession for him. How did he locate me? Sophia asked. He hired a Pinkerton detective, Blake admitted. The man tracked you from Philadelphia to St. Louis, then to Dallas, and finally here to Pecos. Edward received the final report just 3 weeks before he died. Sophia absorbed this information silently. The idea of being watched, followed across the country, was unsettling. Yet there was something poignant about Edward spending his final days trying to make amends for his past wrongs. Did he suffer at the end? She asked quietly. Blake's eyes softened. The doctors kept him comfortable with laudanum. His mind was clear until the final days, though his body failed him rapidly. He hesitated before adding, his last coherent words were about you. He asked me to make sure you received the box, especially the handkerchief. He said you would understand its significance. Sophia's fingers unconsciously went to the pocket of her dress, where she had placed the handkerchief that morning. Thank you for telling me this, Mr. Blake. After the attorney left, promising to send word when he arrived safely back in Philadelphia, Sophia walked to the window and looked out at the dusty main street of Pecos. This town, so different from the elegant avenues of Philadelphia, had become home to her. Here she had built a business with her own hands. Here she had found love with a man as different from Edward Montgomery as the desert was from the sea. When Silas returned that evening, his face was drawn with the weight of his thoughts. They ate supper in relative silence, the unresolved question of Edward's money hanging between them. Finally, Sophia could bear it no longer. I've been thinking all day, she said, setting down her fork, about the inheritance. Silas looked up, waiting. I want to accept the money, she continued firmly. Not because it came from Edward, but because it represents an opportunity for us for our future. But I don't want to use it for ourselves, at least not all of it. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? I want to use part of it to expand the shop, she explained. To hire an assistant or two, maybe offer sewing lessons to girls who need a trade, and I thought, perhaps we could set aside some of it to help others coming west who need a fresh start the way I did. Silas studied her face for a long moment. You'd use his money to help others. Why not? Turn something that represents pain into something good. She reached across the table for his hand. The rest could still go toward our house, our future. But this way, it wouldn't feel like we're just benefiting from my past. We'd be helping create new beginnings for others too. A slow smile spread across Silas's face, the first genuine one since Blake had arrived in Pecos. That sounds like something the woman I love would suggest. Relief washed over Sophia. Then you're not angry about me accepting the money? I was never angry, Sophia, just threatened, I suppose, by a ghost. He squeezed her hand. But you're right, we can use this chance to do good for ourselves and for others. Their reconciliation that night was sweet, the distance of the previous evening forgotten as they reaffirmed their love and commitment to each other. As they lay together afterward, Sophia's head resting on Silas's chest, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected to find after the turmoil of the past few days. I was thinking, Silas murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, maybe we should move up the wedding. No sense waiting for spring now that we have the means to build our house sooner. Sophia propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, he said, pulling her down for a kiss. I want to start our life together properly, as husband and wife. The next morning, Sophia stood in her shop, carefully examining the handkerchief from Edward's box. The unfinished embroidery represented a life she had once imagined for herself, a life that had crumbled to dust before it could even begin. She ran her finger over the half-finished monogram, wondering if she should complete it as a final act of closure. The bell above the shop door jingled, and Sophia quickly folded the handkerchief, slipping it into her pocket as Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, entered with her daughter. "Good morning, Miss Harrington," Mrs. Peterson called cheerfully. "Emily needs a new Sunday dress, and everyone says you work magic with needle and thread." Sophia smiled, pushing thoughts of Philadelphia and Edward Montgomery to the back of her mind. "I'd be delighted to help. Let me show you some of the new fabrics that arrived just last week." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. With their wedding now planned for the end of February, just 3 weeks away, Sophia and Silas had much to arrange. The news that the couple had come into some money spread quickly through Pecos, as such things inevitably do in small towns, though Sophia was careful not to share the details of its source. Silas had already purchased a plot of land on the eastern edge of town with a view of the distant mountains. With their new resources, they hired a crew to begin building immediately. The house would be modest by Philadelphia standards, but grand by Pecos, one's 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and even a dedicated sewing room where Sophia could work on special projects. During this busy time, Sophia found herself thinking of Edward less frequently. The handkerchief remained in her sewing basket, neither completed nor discarded, a tangible reminder of a chapter in her life that was finally closing. The diamond ring and other items from the box were locked in the small safe beneath the floorboards of her shop, to be dealt with another day. One afternoon, while Silas was at the building site overseeing the foundation work, Sophia found herself with an unexpected free hour when a client canceled her appointment. On impulse, she took out the handkerchief and her sewing supplies, intending to finally finish the embroidery as a way of making peace with her past. As she worked, adding delicate stitches to the pattern of roses, she thought about Edward and the strange twist of fate that had connected them across the years and miles, even after his death. There was sadness there, but no longer the sharp pain of betrayal. Whatever Edward had been in life, weak, selfish, conflicted in death, he had tried to make amends. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the shop door open. It was only when a shadow fell across her sewing table that she looked up to find Silas standing there, his expression unreadable as he stared at the handkerchief in her hands. "Silas," she said, startled, "I thought you were at the building site." "We finished early," he replied, his eyes still fixed on the handkerchief. "What are you doing?" The question was simple, but Sophia heard the complexity beneath it. "I'm finishing it," she said honestly. It felt wrong to leave it incomplete, even after all this time. "The monogram," he said, his voice tight. "SM, you're still embroidering his name with yours." Sophia looked down at the intertwined letters, realizing with a jolt how it must appear to him. "No, Silas, it's not, isn't it?" he interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Even now, with everything we're building together, you're sitting here sewing your name with his, a name you never even had." "That's not what this is about," Sophia insisted, setting aside the sewing. "I'm not pining for Edward or the life I might have had with him. I'm making peace with my past so I can fully embrace my future with you." But Silas had already turned away, his back rigid with hurt. "I need some air," he muttered, heading for the door. "Silas, please," Sophia called after him, but he was already gone, the shop bell jingling harshly in his wake. Sophia sank back onto her stool, the handkerchief clutched in her trembling hands. How could something so simple, an act she had intended as closure, have gone so wrong? She looked down at the half-finished monogram SM, Sophia Montgomery. A name that now represented nothing but pain and misunderstanding. With sudden decision, she picked up her scissors and carefully, deliberately, began cutting away the monogram, removing all trace of the M while preserving the S. The delicate fabric protested, a small tear appearing at one edge, but she continued until only her initial remained, surrounded by the pattern of roses. For the next hour she worked steadily, transforming the design. Around the solitary S, she began embroidering a new letter, H. Not for Harrington, her maiden name, but for Hayes, the name she would take in less than 3 weeks when she became Silas's wife. When Silas returned that evening, his anger had cooled, replaced by a quiet sadness that was somehow worse. He found Sophia waiting for him at their small table, the handkerchief laid out between them. "I need you to look at this," she said without preamble. "Really look." Reluctantly, he glanced down at the fabric, then did a double take as he realized what had changed. Where once there had been SM entwined, now there was SH, in delicate stitches, surrounded by a border of roses and small stars that echoed the Texas night sky. "You changed it," he said softly. "I finished it," she corrected him. "The way it always should have been." She reached for his hand across the table. "Edward belongs to my past, Silas. You are my present and my future. I'm sorry if working on this made you doubt that, even for a moment." Silas's fingers closed around hers. "I overreacted. It's just, ever since that lawyer showed up, I've felt like I'm competing with a ghost." "There's no competition," Sophia assured him. "What I felt for Edward was the infatuation of a young girl dazzled by attention, what I feel for you." She paused, searching for words adequate to express the depth of her emotion. "What I feel for you is the love of a woman who knows her own heart and mind. It's real, Silas. It's lasting." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I believe you, and I'm sorry for walking out earlier." "There's something else I need to show you," Sophia said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote to the bank in El Paso this morning. I've arranged for the inheritance to be split into 3 accounts, one for our house and future, one for expanding the shop, and one," she hesitated, "one to establish a small foundation to help women who need to make a fresh start the way I did when I came west." Silas unfolded the paper, reading the details of her plan. "The Harrington Foundation for New Beginnings," he read aloud. "Do you approve?" she asked, a touch of nervousness in her voice. His answer was to rise from his chair, pull her to her feet, and kiss her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "I more than approve," he whispered against her lips. "I fall more in love with you every day, Sophia Harrington." "Soon to be Sophia Hayes," she reminded him with a smile. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The entire town of Pecos seemed involved in the celebration, with women bringing food for the reception and men helping to put the finishing touches on the new house, which wouldn't be fully completed but would be ready enough for the couple to move in after the ceremony. On the morning of the wedding, Sophia woke early in her quarters behind the shop for the last time. Tomorrow, she would wake as Mrs. Silas Hayes in their new home. The thought filled her with a joy so complete it was almost frightening in its intensity. She had just finished her morning coffee when there was a knock at the shop door. Curious, she went to answer it, finding Mrs. Rodriguez, the carpenter's wife, on the doorstep with a large wrapped package in her arms. "Good morning, Miss Harrington," the older woman said warmly. "I hope I'm not too early, but I wanted to give you this before the day got too busy." Sophia invited her in, clearing space on the counter for the mysterious package. "What is this?" she asked as Mrs. Rodriguez set it down. "A wedding gift from the ladies of Pecos," the woman explained, beaming. "Go ahead, open it." Carefully, Sophia unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a stunning quilt, each square lovingly crafted by a different woman in town, the whole assembled into a beautiful pattern that told the story of Pecos and its people. "It's tradition, Mrs. Rodriguez explained as Sophia ran her fingers over the intricate stitching. "Each bride gets a quilt made by all the women. It's for your new marriage bed." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "It's beautiful. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll add a square to the next bride's quilt," the woman replied with a wink. That's how the tradition continues. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Sophia remained at the counter, marveling at the quilt. In Philadelphia, she had been surrounded by people yet often felt alone. Here in Pecos, so far from everything she had once known, she had found not just love with Silas but a community that had embraced her as one of their own. The wedding itself was held in the small church on the edge of town, filled to capacity with seemingly every resident of Pecos in attendance. Sophia wore a dress of her own creation, ivory silk with delicate lace she had ordered specially from El Paso, simpler than what would have been fashionable in Philadelphia, but perfectly suited to her new life. Silas waited for her at the altar, his usually weathered face alight with joy as she walked toward him on the arm of Mr. Rodriguez, who had offered to give her away in the absence of any family. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the couple exchanging vows they had written themselves. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled townspeople nearly raised the church roof. The reception that followed at the hotel was the most festive event Pecos had seen in years. There was music from a local fiddler, dancing, and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. Sophia and Silas moved among their friends, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separating as if they couldn't bear to lose physical contact even for a moment. As the afternoon wore on, they slipped away from the celebration, eager to see their new home together for the first time as husband and wife. The house stood on its small rise at the edge of town, freshly painted white with green shutters. It wasn't entirely finished, some of the interior trim was still missing, and the back porch was just a framework, but it was theirs, built with love and the promise of a future together. Silas swept Sophia into his arms at the threshold, carrying her across in the time-honored tradition as she laughed and held tight to his neck. Inside, the main rooms were furnished with a mixture of new pieces purchased with their newfound resources and items crafted by friends in town, a rocking chair from the Rodriguez workshop, curtains sewn by the hotel cook's wife, a braided rug made by the blacksmith's daughter. "It's perfect," Sophia whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Almost perfect," Silas corrected, pulling a small package from his pocket. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." Sophia unwrapped the package to find a small wooden box, intricately carved with roses and stars, a pattern that echoed the embroidery on her transformed handkerchief. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a golden locket. "Open it," Silas urged softly. With careful fingers, Sophia unlatched the tiny clasp. Inside were two miniature photographs, one of Silas, taken just the week before by a traveling photographer she had hired as a surprise for him, and one of herself that she recognized as having been taken the same day. "How did you get these?" she asked, amazed. Silas grinned. "I may have bribed the photographer to make an extra copy of yours, and apparently you did the same with mine," Sophia laughed, the sound of pure happiness filling their new home. So we had the same idea. Great minds, he agreed, taking the locket and fastening it around her neck. I wanted you to always have me close to your heart, even when we're apart. I love you, Silas Hayes, she said, reaching up to touch his face. And I love you, Sophia Hayes, he replied, emphasizing her new name with evident pleasure. They returned to the reception only long enough to thank their guests and say their goodbyes before retreating to the privacy of their new home as night fell over Pecos. As they prepared for their first night as husband and wife, Sophia carefully spread the community quilt over their bed, smoothing the colorful squares with reverent hands. It's a beautiful tradition, she remarked as Silas watched from across the room. One of many we'll build together, he said, coming to stand beside her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded square of cream-colored fabric. I brought this from your shop, I thought it should be here too. It was the handkerchief, now fully completed with the SH monogram surrounded by the roses and stars she had so carefully embroidered. Sophia took it, deeply touched by his gesture. Where shall we put it? She asked. Silas considered for a moment, then walked to their dresser where a small framed photograph of the two of them stood. He carefully draped the handkerchief beneath it, the embroidery visible like a delicate banner. There, he said, a reminder of the past we've overcome and the future we're building. Sophia wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. It's perfect. Later that night, as they lay together in their new bed beneath the community quilt, Sophia felt a sense of completion she had never known before. Edward Montgomery and Philadelphia seemed like another lifetime, a prelude to the real story of her life, which was only now truly beginning. What are you thinking about? Silas murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. How lucky I am, she replied honestly. To have found my way here, to have found you, we found each other, he corrected gently. And I think that's how it was always meant to be. Spring turned to summer, and the house on the edge of Pecos was finally completed. Sophia's shop flourished with the addition of 2 young assistants girls she was training in dressmaking and millinery, giving them the skills to support themselves in a world that offered women few opportunities for independence. The Harrington Foundation for New Beginnings had already helped 3 women start new lives in the area, a young widow from Missouri who now ran the town's boarding house, a former saloon girl who had opened a small bakery, and a schoolteacher fleeing an abusive father who now taught Pecos's children with dedicated enthusiasm. Silas had used his portion of the inheritance to invest in cattle and additional land, gradually building what promised to be one of the most successful small ranches in the area. He still worked with the Cross T, but now as a partner rather than a hired hand, his knowledge of cattle and the land proving invaluable to the operation. In July, as they celebrated their 5-month anniversary with a quiet dinner on their new back porch, overlooking the garden Sophia had planted in the spring, she shared the news she had been keeping to herself for nearly 2 weeks. I visited Dr. Wilson today, she said, setting down her fork and reaching for Silas's hand. There's something I need to tell you. Concern immediately crossed his face. Are you ill? No, she assured him with a smile. Quite the opposite. She guided his hand to rest on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby, Silas, sometime in February, according to the doctor. The joy that transformed his face was something Sophia knew she would remember until her dying day. He rose from his chair and lifted her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and protested that he would make her dizzy. A baby, he repeated in wonder when he finally set her down. Our baby, she confirmed, her hands still resting on his chest. The beginning of our family. That night, as they lay in bed discussing names and plans for the nursery they would need to prepare, Sophia felt the final pieces of her life falling into perfect place. The ghosts of Philadelphia had been laid to rest, replaced by the vibrant reality of Pecos and the life she and Silas were creating together. In early February of 1877, almost exactly a year after Sophia had received the letter that had brought her past crashing back into her present, She gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Henry, honoring Silas's father who had died during the war. As she held her son for the first time, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger with surprising strength, Sophia felt a love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. Silas sat beside them on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, his face a mixture of exhaustion and elation after the long night of labor. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the downy hair on their son's head. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and your eyes, I think." "Your chin, though," Sophia replied with a tired smile. "Poor boy," Silas chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You did so well, my love. I've never been more proud or more in awe of anyone in my life." As baby Henry slept in her arms, Sophia reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. If Edward had not betrayed her, she would never have left Philadelphia. If she had not fled west, she would never have found Pecos, never have met Silas, never have known this particular joy of holding their child. "What are you thinking?" Silas asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones," she replied honestly. "And that I wouldn't change a single step of the journey that brought me here." He nodded in understanding, his hand covering hers where it cradled their son. "To new beginnings," he said softly. "And to the journey ahead." "To the journey ahead," Sophia echoed, her heart full to bursting with love for her husband and their child. Whatever that journey might hold, whatever joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges awaited them, they would face it together as a family. Outside their window, the Texas sun rose over Pecos, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, a new day dawning on their new beginning. And Sophia Hayes, once Sophia Harrington, once almost Sophia Montgomery, knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Sophia sat on the back porch of their home, watching as Silas chased their laughing son around the yard. At 3 years old, their daughter Emma toddled after them, her dark curls bouncing with each determined step. The house had expanded along with their family, a new wing added 2 years earlier to accommodate their growing household, which now included not just their children, but also Sophia's young assistant, Mary, who had lost her parents and come to live with them while she learned the dressmaking trade. The shop in town had grown as well, now occupying the entire building with the living quarters transformed into a workroom where several women were employed making dresses, shirts, and other garments that were sold not just in Pecos but shipped to stores in El Paso and even as far as Dallas. The Harrington Foundation continued its work, having helped nearly 20 women establish new lives over the past 5 years. Sophia took particular pride in this accomplishment, knowing that each woman represented a story of resilience and hope much like her own had been. As twilight deepened, Silas carried an exhausted Henry over his shoulder while holding Emma's hand, the three of them returning to the porch where Sophia waited. "I think these 2 cowpokes are ready for bed," he announced with a grin. "No bed," Emma protested even as she rubbed her eyes with a chubby fist. "Story first." "One story," Sophia agreed, lifting her daughter into her lap, "then bed for both of you." After the children were finally settled, Sophia and Silas returned to the porch, sitting side by side in the rocking chairs he had crafted the previous winter. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the familiar constellations that had watched over their life together. "I had a letter from Philadelphia today," Sophia said after a comfortable silence. "From Mr. Blake." Silas glanced at her, his expression curious but not concerned. Over the years, Harrison Blake had maintained a cordial correspondence with Sophia, keeping her informed of matters related to the foundation and occasionally sharing news of Philadelphia society. "Anything interesting?" he asked. "Lillian Pierce finally married," Sophia replied. "To a widower with 3 children, Blake says she seems happy." Silas nodded, reaching over to take her hand. "I'm glad for her." Sophia squeezed his fingers, grateful once again for the understanding and security of their relationship. Edward Montgomery's name no longer hung between them like a specter. He had become simply a figure from the past, a step on the journey that had brought them together. Blake also mentioned something else, she continued. He's considering retiring from law practice and moving west. He asked if Pecos might be a good place to settle. What did you tell him? That we would welcome him, of course. She smiled. He's been a good friend to us in his way, and Pecos could use a good attorney, Silas chuckled. That's true enough. Judge Parker complains every time he has to send to El Paso for legal advice. They fell silent again, the gentle creaking of their rocking chairs mingling with the night sounds of the Texas prairie. Sophia closed her eyes, savoring the peaceful moment. Are you happy, Sophia? Silas asked suddenly, his voice soft in the darkness. She opened her eyes to look at him, surprised by the question. Happier than I ever imagined possible, she answered truthfully. Are you? Every day with you and our children is a blessing I never thought I'd have, he said simply. When I was riding the range all those years, drifting from one outfit to another, I never let myself hope for a family of my own. And now look at you, she teased gently. Respectable rancher, father of two, pillar of the community, he laughed, the sound warm in the night air. All because a beautiful dressmaker from Philadelphia decided to open a shop in Pecos, Texas. All because a handsome cowboy decided to welcome her to town, she countered. Their hands remained clasped between the rocking chairs, a physical connection that mirrored the deeper bond they shared. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely voice rising toward the star-strewn sky. You know, Silas said after a while, I was thinking we might take a trip next spring. The children are old enough to travel now, and Mary can mind the shop for a few weeks. A trip, Sophia repeated, intrigued. Where to? I was thinking Philadelphia. He turned to gauge her reaction. You've told the children so many stories about the big city, the museums and parks. I thought they might like to see it, and you might like to show it to them. Sophia felt a rush of emotion at his suggestion. She had not returned to Philadelphia since fleeing it 6 years earlier. The idea of going back, not as the heartbroken young woman she had been, but as the confident, successful woman she had become, with her beloved family beside her, was powerfully appealing. I would love that, she said, her voice thick with feeling. Thank you for suggesting it. Silas lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Then it's settled. The Hayes family will take on the big city next spring. As they continued to rock gently in the warm Texas night, Sophia reflected on the strange, beautiful journey of her life. From the refined drawing rooms of Philadelphia to the dusty streets of Pecos, from the naive young woman dazzled by Edward Montgomery to the self-assured wife and mother she had become, from heartbreak to a happiness deeper and more authentic than anything she could have imagined. The handkerchief with its embroidered SH still lay framed on their dresser, a reminder not of what she had lost, but of what she had found, a love strong enough to heal old wounds and brave enough to face whatever the future might bring. A love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into the foundation of a life filled with purpose and joy. I love you, Silas Hayes, she whispered into the night, his hand tightened around hers, his voice equally soft but certain when he replied. And I love you, Sophia Hayes. Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come. Together, they rocked in companionable silence as the Texas stars wheeled overhead, their shared life stretching before them like the vast, promising landscape of the West itself, wild and beautiful, challenging and rewarding, and above all, theirs to shape together.